Today we're going to be learning Yoma Daf Kaftet. Today's Daf, our learning is in honor of the city of Jerusalem. Today we're celebrating 54 years since its unification. We are going to start at the very top of Kaftet Amud Aleph. Start with a kind of complicated passage. Hirhure, maybe not for the reasons you normally think are difficult, but Hirhure Avera Kashume Avera. Thoughts of doing evil deeds, sins, are actually worse than the sin itself. Okay, what does this mean exactly? So it's a bit of a question. What exactly this means? Rashi says, Ta'avat nashim, we're talking about desire for women. Kashim lachish epsaro yoter migufo shel maaseh. They're actually harder on the body, the desire, than actually once you've done the action itself. Okay, there's a whole bunch of interpretations brought, for example, in the Steinsaltz, in the Koren. It talks about how he brings a few different explanations. Some people say it's relative severity of thought versus action. Okay, or the thoughts of transgression transpire in the mind. The damage they cause is greater than the damage caused by actually engaging in sin, which merely involves the body. That's a quote from Moreh Nevuchim. Okay, that actually using the body is worse. Using the mind, a sin of the mind is actually worse than a sin of the body. Okay, there's a bunch of other different explanations there. If you have the Koran, you can look, but it's a bit of a hard understanding of what this is. But again, they're talking about these Hirhurim and how bad they are. Therefore, the thoughts of doing evil deeds is worse than the sin itself. V'simanech, and how do you remember this? Reicha de bischa. Okay, the smell of the meat is when you, like sometimes you walk into a room, in fact, it's kind of funny. I have vegetarian and vegan daughters, and once in a while, my vegetarian daughter surprises me. We'll have some meat cooking up and she's like, oh, it smells so good. And I always think, what do you mean? You're vegetarian, you don't like this stuff. But sometimes there's the smell, and the smell is much more enticing than actually eating it, right? Sometimes you smell something, or the smell of the coffee is so strong and it's really appealing. Then you drink the coffee, okay, it's good, but there's something about that smell that's very strong. So that's how you remember this concept. Shilhe dekaita kasha mikaita. The end of summer is actually harder than earlier in the summer. Why is that? V'simanech tanora shagira. When you put something in a preheated oven, it's actually much hotter than, right? So the summer, the end of the summer, it's been heated up so much that a hot day coming after all these other hot days is incredibly hot. Ish de sitva, a fever in the autumn, or actually I think they mean even in the stav usually means the autumn, but I think they might mean here even, right, the choref. They really mean the winter. Okay, it sounds like stav, which is autumn, but they mean the winter. A fever in the winter, kasha midekaita, is actually much more severe than in the summer. Why is that? B'simanech tanura karira. To take and heat up a cold oven takes a lot more than a hot oven. Likewise, if you're going to heat up your body with a fever in the winter, it's going to take a lot more to heat up your body with fever than it will in the summer. So it must be, it's a much harsher fever. I don't know how much truth there is to this, but this is what they're saying in the Gemara. Migmar ba'atikta kashim bechadita. So learn something old that you've already forgotten, according to most of the commentaries, is actually harder than learning something new. Okay, so what the commentaries say, if you look in Rashi, he says, you learn and you forgot, it's much harder. It's harder to remember something you forgot than to remember something you never learned. I find this a little hard to understand because I actually think that when I learned something, when I remember that when I forgot it, but then it comes back to me pretty quickly. So another possibility I think could be that when you learn something new, it's much more exciting and appealing to learn than something old. You've already learned something. It's sometimes harder for me to go back and reteach something I already taught when I have it all written out, what I did with it and how I taught it. I always look at it and it's kind of boring, been there, done that. And I don't really want to look through it again. It's harder to look through with kind of a new perspective. But when you look at something you've never learned before, it's much easier to come with a new perspective and it's much more interesting. So I think that's another possible way of reading it. V'simanech, how do you remember this? Tina Bartina. Okay, Rashi says this is tit shegovlim otomi tit. If you take mortar and you mix it with other mortar, So if you take chomer kotel yashan kasher legablo yoter mitit shalafar chadash. If you take a new one, it's much better than if you take something that's old and you try to mix it with something that's new. It doesn't really work very well. Amar Rabbi Aval, my tamer de Rebbe. What's the reason for Rebbe? Tichtiv. Okay, so now we're back to 1 second. Rebbe had said on the previous page, Eino domeh timor shel levana letimor shel chama. Right, the light of the moon is not like the light of the sun. As the timor shel levana metamer ve'oleh kimakel, it's kind of like a spotlight, and the timor shel chama maftzia lekan ulekan, it disperses. So now we're going to see that where does Rebbe get this from? Dichtiv, right? So you could say he gets it from looking outside and seeing the difference between them, but in the Gemara's typical manner, they like to prove it from a pasuk. So a verse from Tehillim, Dichtiv lamnetzech al ayelet hashachar. So what's this ayelet hashachar? An ayala is a deer. What does that have to do with the shachar, the early morning, the dawn? My alazo karnea maftzilot lekanu lekan, just like a deer, the horns split in different directions. The dawn is the same thing, where the light disperses in all different directions. Rashi points out, by the way, that it's difficult to say this is an ayala because he points out that the ayala, where is it? In Rashi Dibor Matchil ayala zo, lav dafka nakat, sharei ein karnaim lenekeva. An ayala is feminine, it doesn't have horns. So interesting that Rashi just points out there's a bit of a problem with this, with the using an ayala in this manner. But in any case, the Gemara we're going to see continues to use this analogy further on also. Amar Rabbi Zera, lama nimshala Esther la ayala. Okay, where did Esther come in? We're talking about Esther from the Purim story. So Rashi says that in Masechet Megillah, they say that Esther said this Mizmor Tehillim. This Mizmor Tehillim of Ayelet HaShachar has to do with Esther, and because the content of it, they say that it happened when she got to the Beit HaTzlamim. Nistalkai Mena Shechina, she was on her way into Achashverosh, and she passed by the idols, and all of a sudden the Shechina left her, and she felt it. Amra Eli Eli Lama Azavtani, and then the words of the Mizmor come forth, which is, God, God, why did you leave me? So it's describing Esther on her way into King Achashverosh when she's worried that maybe he won't accept her. So now it says, why is she compared to an ayala, to a deer? According to Rabbi Zera, Lomar lecha, my ayala rachmat sar b'chavival ba'ala kol sha'a b'sha'a k'sha'a rishona. An ayala has a very tight womb, and therefore she's always beloved to her husband all the time. It never gets wider. It's always tight, narrow, and therefore it's always like the first time when she mates. Also, when she made it when she had relations with Achashverosh, it was as if every time it was as if it was the first time. That shows how beloved she was to Achashverosh. Maybe not the most pleasant image for us to have in our minds, but that's how the Gemara, that's what Rabbi Zera says. Amar Rabbi Asi, lama nimshecha Esther l'shachar. So that's ayala. What about a shachar? Just like the dawn is the end of the night, Esther was the end of the time period of miracles. That was it after that. So now the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Ha'ika Chanukah. We also have Hanukkah. Miracle of Hanukkah happened after the story of Purim. We all know that. That was in the second temple. And the Purim story was in between the first and second temple. So what did they answer? It was the last of the miracles that ended up being part of the books of the Tanakh. So now they say, that works if you hold that. There's a whole debate about Esther, whether it should be part of the canonization of the Tanakh, of the Tanakh or not. So if you say it's supposed to be there, then that makes sense. It wasn't meant to be written in the Bible. What can you say? So we'll have a different explanation. Let's explain that Ayelet HaShachar is, as Rabbi Ben Yamin Ben Yefet says, Amar Rabbi Elazar, the name of Rabbi Elazar. The Amar Rabbi Ben Yamin Ben Yefet, Amar Rabbi Elazar, because this is what he actually said. Why are the prayers of the righteous like a deer? We're going to go back to the same image we saw earlier. My ayala zo calls megadela karnea maftzilot. Just like an ayala, as it grows more horns, they keep splitting. Okay, the more they daven, and it's here, the more they grow their horns, the more they spread out. Here, the more they daven, the more they pray, their prayers are heard. So it's this image of the more, the merrier almost, and how much it makes things better, which is less connected to Esther, so to speak, right? It's just kind of darshaning that pasuk, although I guess theoretically one could connect it to Esther. But that's the way, right? That the shachar is a reference to the prayer. Okay, next. Shachatu et tamid. So now we go back to our Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah on Daf Kaf Chet Amud Aleph. So we had Amar Lahem HaMemuneh, go see if the Shechita came. They go to the roof. They have the whole ceremony. Then they say, because one time it happened that they thought that the sun rose and it really was the moon. And that's how we got off on this tangent. To which they now say, right? And then they slaughtered the Tamid and then they brought it out to the Beit HaSrefa. And then it says, Horidu Kohen Gadol LeBeit HaTfilah. Now, when we read the Mishnah, we didn't read it that was a continuation of the story. That goes back to the beginning part of the Mishnah. But the Gemara first thinks that that's a continuation of the story, to which they say, Eimat, when did this story happen? If you say it was on a regular day of the year, then why would it mention specifically a Kohen Gadol? He didn't usually do the work. So you wouldn't need to be then Molid Kohen LeBeit HaTfilah, that the Kohen Gadol went to go to the mikveh. You wouldn't need that. So therefore, they say, Ela Yom Kippurim. Well, if it's Yom Kippurim, we're going to have a separate problem. The story could never have happened in Yom Kippurim. Why is that? This is an interesting fact the Gemara tells you. Yom Kippurim, Ki Amar Barak Balkai Hotziu. Sorry, skipped a line. Ela Yom Kippurim or Elevana Miika. Can't possibly be that the moonlight came in and they thought it was the sun. Okay, now why is this? So the Gemara doesn't really tell you this. But if you look in Rashi, right, okay, he doesn't really say this, but the Mefarshim explain that the moon in that time of year, that time of the month, is not on the same side as where the sun is. The moon, right, let me get it right, but that the moon comes from the, here, let me just check it all, make sure I have it right. The moon is, right. The moon never rises in the east when it's the dawn of Yom Kippur. The moon is always in the beginning part of the month on the west side. Okay, and therefore, right, let me just check. Right, it would happen the second half of the month. Right, only once during the second half of the month. Once during the second half of the month when they were confused, and once on Yom Kippur for a different reason. Right. Okay. So that's something else. That's that. Okay. But basically the idea being that the moon rises in the west on that side and doesn't rise in the east, in which case nobody would confuse it with the sun rising because the sun rises in the east. So there's no way that would happen on the 10th of the month. It just doesn't make any sense. And therefore it can't be that. So therefore the Gemara says, oh, hachi karma. This is how it should be. Ubi Yom Kippurim ki amar barak barakai. Goes back to the beginning of the Mishnah. We had a parenthetical statement about this one time when that happened. That happened on a regular day, and it was obviously at the later part of the month. But this issue of Barak Barkai, right? We had the whole ceremony they would do on Yom Kippur morning, and then after they finished and they knew it was early enough, then the Kohen Gadol would go to the mikveh. Tani Avuah de Rabbi Abba. Lo zo b'lvad amru, ela af malikata of u'kvitzat mincha balayla tisaref. So he now comes and says, not only if, now what did we say in our Mishnah? We're now back to our parenthetical statement. They slaughtered the Korban Tamid, and then they did it too early. At nighttime, they had to burn it. So, because it was disqualified, because it was too early. So Avuah de Rabbi Avin, the father of Rabbi Avin, said in a Braita, he brought this Braita that said, not just that would be burned, but also milikat ha'of, if you slaughtered, the way they did slaughtering in the temple for a bird wasn't through shchita, like cutting the neck, but they would do malika, which is the Kohen kind of puts his finger in the nape of the neck and kills the bird like that. And kmitza mincha balayla tisaref. If you did the malikat ha'of, or you did a kmitza of a mincha, which is you have the dough for the mincha, the Kohen puts his 3 middle fingers in, scoops out some of it. That's the part that's supposed to burn on the altar. They first put it in a kli sharet, in a holy sanctified vessel. And then if they did that at night, basically, it would be disqualified and they'd have to burn it. So bishlama olata of maida have. It's whatever, if you already slaughtered the bird, we understand, of course you have to burn it. You can't fix that. But elakomets, nehadra v'nehadra v'nikmatze b'yamama. Just go do it again. Put the kmitza, whatever you took out of the dough, stick it back in. And you did it at night, so it's disqualified, but you didn't mess it up. All you have to do is, it's not irreversible. Shchita, malika, irreversible. The animal's dead. There's nothing you could do. But here, you could put it back in and redo the kmitza in the morning. You could just stick it back into the batter. So why don't we suggest that? So hu tanela v'hu amrala. He asked the question and he answered it. Klei sharet mekadshin afilu shelo b'zmano. What happens if you put something in a kli sharet in the wrong time? It still becomes sanctified. Now, once that kmitza becomes sanctified, that part that you separated from the dough, if it's sanctified because you put it in a holy vessel, becomes sanctified by being put in the holy vessel, at that point, you can't return it to the bigger bowl where it has stuff that's not sanctified. You can't start mixing those things. So therefore, once you already put it in a kli, even if you put it in the wrong time, it still becomes sanctified. It sounds like that maybe somebody thought that if you put it in the bowl at a time when it couldn't be sanctified, maybe it wouldn't be sanctified, or where it couldn't be performed. But this says, no, right? It is. So it's mekachina filu bismano, and that's why it has to be burnt. To which the Gemara says, meitive, but wait, we have a contradictory source to this. Zehaklal, this is the rule. There's a little bit of a girsa problem here, and you'll see, because there's something that doesn't make so much sense. So some people take out some of these words, but I'll read them, and then I'll point out what doesn't make so much sense. Kol hakarev bayom kadosh bayom. Anything that's sacrificed during the day becomes sanctified in a kli sharet, a sanctified vessel during the day. V'kol hakarev balayla kadosh balayla. And anything that gets sacrificed or offered at night, which is very strange because not much is offered at night, but we'll see. Kadosh balayla. Okay, anything at night, sanctified at night. So what does Rashi say this is? Rashi says, like minchat nesachim. If you remember, you're supposed to bring a mincha offering together with certain sacrifices that you bring. You bring uminchatam v'nizkehem kimidubar. We say it in our tefillot. So that can be brought. We already learned that it doesn't have to be brought the same day as the sacrifice. And according to Rashi here, it says could even be brought at night based on a Gemara in Menachot. So now, that means that a minchat nesachim could be sanctified at night. V'kol hakarev bein bayom bein balayla, kadosh bein bayom bein balayla. Now, anything that could be sanctified either during the day or at night could be sanctified even during the day or at night. Now, this is a little bit strange because if we have 3 categories, then the minchat nesachim could be done at night and could be done during the day. So it's weird to put it in the category of things that are sacrificed at night, because it's not only sacrificed at night, it could be sacrificed also during the day. And that's why some people take out some of these lines, because it's kind of redundant. Katani miyat. Now, what does it say here? Kol hakarev bayom kadosh bayom, which sounds like bayom im balayla lo, but things are supposed to be sacrificed during the day. Sounds like they're only sanctified during the day. They wouldn't be sanctified at night. So how could you possibly say this about the mincha that we talked about here, right? Which is not the minchat nesachim. This is just a regular mincha, a kmitza of a mincha offering, like a voluntary meal offering. And that shouldn't be sanctified at night. So it shouldn't become disqualified, because if it never was sanctified, never disqualified. You could just put it back into the dough and redo it in the morning. So what do they suggest? Well, maybe when it says, Kol hakarev bayom kadosh bayom, maybe it means Dilma eino kadosh likarev aval kadosh lipasel. Maybe it's not going to be sanctified to the extent that you can actually sacrifice it because it was done at the wrong time. But it is sanctified enough that it can become disqualified, which is exactly what we were looking for. So that's a possible way to read it. However, we have another question. Mativ Rabbi Zera, he comes with another question. Sideret halechem ve'eta bezichim achal Shabbat. If you remember, there's the showbread, the 12 loaves, And with that, there's these 2 bowls of frankincense that are put out. They're put out every Shabbat, and they're taken off every Shabbat the next week. The bezichim, the incense is offered, burnt, an incense, and then the kohanim get the bread to eat. So sideret halechem ve'et bezichim achara Shabbat. Let's say you set them up not on Shabbat, but the day after, or that night. V'hiktir et bezichim b'Shabbat. And then comes the next week. Now they weren't there, they weren't put on the right time. So the next week comes and you want to offer up the bezichim. Psula, you can't do that. It's disqualified because it wasn't put down at the right time. Ketzad yaseh, so what do? Yinichenu, this is going to be the part that's problematic. Yinichenu l'Shabbat haba'ah. You put it in, let's say Saturday night. The next week, it hasn't been there a full week. It wasn't put on the right time. You can't use it. But you can't offer the frankincense. But what do? You leave it one more week. And then the lechem hapanim ends up being there for an entire week. And then, and you bring a new bowls of frankincense. You can keep the same bread. Okay, nothing happens to them because you kept them on the table. It's fine. And even if nothing happens to them, then they were on a whole week, and then you can burn the new frankincense. So now they say, Amai, tikdosh v'tipasel. Now, it should become sanctified when, now, what did we say? The mincha became problematic the night before, right? The night before it was offered, it becomes problematic. So now they say, 1 minute, right. So now we were suggesting that maybe it does become sanctified in order to become disqualified, even if it was put at the wrong time. So if this was put at the wrong time on Saturday night, when Shabbat hits and it's the right time, right, theoretically, it should actually, even before that, it should, since you put it on at the wrong time, what did we say? Even if you put it on at the wrong time, it should be disqualified. So right now we're going to just suggest, why shouldn't it become sanctified enough to disqualify it? It's not sanctified enough to say it's good because we had to wait a whole other week, but it should be sanctified enough to disqualify it. So how can you leave it on the table and then, right, offer the frankincense at the end and have the kohanim eat the bread? So Amarava, mandikamotiv, shapir kamotiv. Says, well, you know what? This is a very good question. On the other hand, avoid Rabbi Avin nami manita kamar. However, we have another problem because the Avu of Rabbi Avin, he brought a braita. It's not like he made this up on his own. If he was in a moru, made something up, we could say maybe he's wrong. But he quoted a braita that basically said the kmitzah mincha gets burned, which means it's disqualified. So why isn't the showbread disqualified, but the kmitzah, the mincha is? So they say, kasaval laila ein mechusar zman, yom mechusar zman. What do they say? Night, when you put it in at night, the night before, that's what I stumbled before, I almost said before. They only say it now. When you put something the night before, that's not considered the wrong time entirely because the night goes with the day. So if you do it at night, before it was supposed to be offered during the day, since you can't do it at night, but you did it at night and the night connects with the day, it's as if you did it that day and therefore it's sanctified. However, it's not disqualified. But if you do it on a day, that's the Yom is mechusar zman. You did that on Saturday night, which is, let's just call it Sunday for all intents and purposes. It could have been Saturday night, it could have been Sunday, it doesn't really matter. You did it on Sunday, let's say. You put the bread out, wrong day. That point, it's not sanctified at all. When does it become sanctified? When it's its day, which would be next Shabbat. And then it's the right time, so all is good. However, they say no. But if what you just said is really things become sanctified the night before, then kimate beshimshe tikdosh v'tifsal. Then comes next week, Friday night comes in, the bread's been on the table the whole week, but it's not sanctified, even though it's on a table, which is a klei sharet. But the table doesn't sanctify it because it wasn't the right time. But comes Friday night, it becomes the right time to sanctify it. However, you're not allowed to put it on at night. So at this point, it becomes sanctified and immediately disqualified, which is the same thing that we said about the kmitza. So why isn't it disqualified? I'm a Ravina, shekidem v'silko. It must be you took it off Friday night so that it wouldn't be there Friday night. It wouldn't become sanctified to be disqualified. And then you put it back on Shabbat morning. And that's when the following week you can offer the frankincense and eat the bread and not have to burn it. Marzutra is going to give a different answer. Vitam or Ravashi, or maybe Ravashi's answer. Maybe he's the one who said it. Amar afilu tema b'shaloki dem b'sakot. Even if you didn't take it off, kevan shesidro shelo kemitzvato naaseh kemo shesidro hakof. One of my favorite lines. Since you set it up in the wrong manner, right? You did it on the wrong day. It's as if sidro hakof. It's as if a monkey did it. Okay, that's kind of funny, right? To think about a monkey doing it, but what's it basically saying? It's a meaningless act entirely. And only when next Shabbat comes in and then it happens to be on the table, do they become sanctified. But it's not like you actually did anything. Now you can't, right? Because you did it in the wrong time, it's as if you didn't do anything. So therefore it doesn't become disqualified. Okay. If you look at Rashi, he says, few lines from the bottom now, Shalomi dato, right? It's as if you didn't do it with any knowledge or intent. Right? It was done earlier in the week, but it wasn't it all the time that you would put it on. It's not like this kometz. In other words, those aren't missing, right? They're within the time frame, right? You're not allowed to do it at night, but it's still within that day. But when you do it before, it's as if a monkey put them on, and therefore, right, only and then according to this, you'd have to reset it up in order for it to, right, 1 second, according to this, right, you don't have to take it off before. Okay, this is important. It's an important difference. The last answer, we said you'd have to take it off Friday night so that it's not on Friday night. It doesn't become sanctified and disqualified. According to this answer, you don't have to take it off then, but you would have to reset it up on the next week. Okay, and that's clear actually, according to everybody. You have to reset it up. It's not going to work. I forgot to mention that earlier. Unless you reset up the bread on the upcoming Shabbat, you put it down on the table again. You kind of pick it up, put it down. But according to this answer, you don't have to pick it up and take it off the night before. You only have to do it in the morning, pick it up, put it back down, and then it will work again for the upcoming week, not for the previous week. It doesn't work for that previous week, but it does work for the upcoming week. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll pick up from the very bottom of the page in tomorrow's shiur. Happy Yom Yerushalayim to everybody.